This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. Over the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. A quick update to the markets as we start the hour. DD Global shares continue to rise in today's session. They were up at least 12% at 14.08 GMT. Essentially priced at just under $16 a share. That gives the firm a market cap of around $76 billion. Top 40, the JSE has gone up by 22% in the last 12 months. Compare that to a 32% rise, though, in the MSCI index covering Europe, the Middle East and Africa over the same period. Platinum stocks had some of the largest gains in today's session. Northern Platinum and Pala Platinum roughly 4% higher. In West Africa, Zenith Bank among the top movers in Nigeria today. With today's close, though, it's still almost 4% lower on a year-to-date basis. Tonight, we start off on the business of oil. Saudi Arabia and Russia have tentatively agreed to gradually increase oil output between themselves in the months to come. Delegates have essentially confirmed at today's OPEC meeting that negotiations over the details of the supply increase are still underway. The proposal under examination is expected to add about 2 million barrels of crude a day to the output available from August through to December. But the implementation of the deal is conditional on the status of talks between the United States on one hand and Iran on the other. Both sides are seeking to revive the JCPOA, the nuclear pact, and lift sanctions on the Islamic Republic's oil exports. Now, that would also extend the expiry date for all of the OPEC Plus cuts from April through to December 2022. In East Africa, the government of Uganda is looking to rationalize the excise duty regime on telecommunication services by scrapping the over-the-top tax. You might remember that as a much criticized tax on social media introduced back in 2018. The State Minister for Planning, Amos Lugolobi, said that this would essentially be replaced with a harmonized excise duty rate of 12% on airtime, value-added services and internet data. Now, data in this new tax would exclude provision of medical services and educational services as well. The over-the-top tax was first introduced back in 2018. It caused a nationwide uproar and protests, in fact, in Kampala. In the wake of that uproar, the government proposed to drop the tax, and it said that the Uganda Revenue Authority had failed to hit the tax collection target from it. And that was after Ugandans basically resorted to virtual private networks, VPNs, in order to bypass that particular tax. Over now to Zimbabwe, where large-scale gold miners will be allowed to export part of the bullion directly instead of having to sell it to the central bank-owned Fidelity printers and refinery. The government says gold worth about $1.2 billion is illegally exported from Zimbabwe every year. But small-scale miners, who extract most of the precious metal in the country, blame low prices and late payments by state agencies as an incentive for those leakages. CGTN's Ramah Nyang has the details from Harare.
Mining houses that increase production above their average monthly output will be allowed to export that additional portion directly. The move is expected to incentivize production, unlock finance and improve viability, which had been affected by low prices paid by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe-owned Fidelity printers and refinery, which up until now was the sole buyer of gold in the country. It has previously delayed payments to miners, which, coupled with the unattractive prices, has been cited for the revenue leakages in the sector. Government estimates that a whopping $1.2 billion worth of gold is smuggled out of the country every year. The central bank plans to unbundle Fidelity printers and sell a stake in the refinery business to mining houses as part of measures to liberalize the sector. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
All right, then a quick run through some company news. Let's start in Kenya. Kenya Airways, a state carrier, has completed negotiations for a productivity-based payment arrangement with its lessors, as we heard on this program last week Friday. Now, the airline has also changed the lease terms on its aircraft fleet, opting for hourly rates in place of fixed costs. It adds that it expects to save roughly $45 million this year, already having saved some $3.1 million after terminating a leasing arrangement on two Boeing 737-700 aircraft. Uganda's MTN, in the meantime, has commenced the process of automating its network in preparation for the rollout of 5G data services. The company adds that it has gotten into a partnership with members under the Telecom Infra project that will aid MTN in deploying TIP's disaggregated cell site gateway technology, which provides a much faster transport network to move all telecommunications traffic across networks and carriers, and that includes everything from phone calls, data, messages, mobile money, and digital services as well. SoftBank is expected to raise over $7 billion this month by selling US dollar and euro-denominated bonds. That marks the Japanese conglomerate's first such foreign bond sale in 3 years. It says it plans to sell dollar bonds worth about $3.85 billion, with maturities ranging from 3.5 years all the way to 10 years. Euro bonds worth about 2.95 billion euros with a similar duration will also be coming to market. And finally, the Japanese car maker Nissan has announced plans to build a $1.38 billion factory in Sunderland in the United Kingdom. That will create an estimated 1,650 new jobs. The company adds that it will build its new generation all-electric models at that site. Its partner, Envision AESC, is also expected to build a new electric battery plant. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. South Africa's alcohol businesses take a hit from a fourth lockdown. The details coming up shortly.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference. Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to South Africa. The country's liquor industry staring at more job losses after a new alcohol ban. That is the fourth since March last year. These restrictions are set to remain in place for 14 days. President Cyril Ramaphosa imposed the ban on the 27th of June as Africa's most industrialized economy continues to battle a third wave of COVID-19. From Johannesburg, here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu.
It's a double blow to South Africa. The country is struggling with a massive rise in COVID infections and is having to deal with a battered economy struggling to get over the hard lockdowns of 2020. Over 7,400 people in the beer industry lost their jobs in the last year as a result of the 3 liquor bans. The industry is warning that more jobs will be lost on the back of this latest ban.
A lot of the craft breweries within our sector have barely survived the last 3 alcohol bans, and those who have made it past the 3 are just hanging on the last thread at the moment. A lot of businesses that have used a lot of their own savings to survive the 3 past bans are going to find it very, very difficult to get past this current ban.
The liquor industry is important to the South African economy, contributing around 4% to GDP. South Africans also love their beer. Beer accounts for over 70% of all alcohol consumed in the country.
All the orders that we had, obviously, they were cancelled, which means it will have a detrimental impact on our cash flow. We have gone ahead and bought raw materials, packaging materials in advance based on the fact that we didn't anticipate another lockdown coming our way. It's going to be a difficult conversation with our suppliers in about 30 days from now when they come knocking for payment.
Last year, the beer industry lost $992 million in sales income. In turn, government lost $545 million in taxes and excise charges.
I think there will be a long-term effect. And I do think that opportunities within the brewing industry and the growth forecast for the brewing industry, it took a knock, and I think it's going to take us a couple of years to recover.
As an industry, we were just about to recover from the last ban, which happened in January, February. So this 4th ban comes a bit of a shock for us.
The liquor bans have had a devastating impact on the entire hospitality industry. It's a tough position, though. South Africa is battling a 3rd wave of COVID while trying desperately to free up hospital capacity. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to Tanzania. The government there has unveiled a $50 billion 5-year development plan that's aimed at improving industrial production, creating a much more inclusive economy and boosting investment as well. The plan also will focus on finalizing the country's large infrastructure projects, and that includes a new SGR rail line as well as the Nyerere hydropower dam. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with the details.
Tanzania has launched the 3rd phase of its 15-year development plan. It's a $50 billion national development initiative to chart the country's future. It will focus on providing high-quality livelihoods, good governance, ensuring the rule of law, as well as building a strong and competitive economy. The government says it means business.
We will not tolerate tax evasion, laziness at work, misuse of public funds, as well as corruption of any kind. The government will continue to embrace creativity and receive suggestions aimed at improving the implementation of the plan.
Tanzanian governments have steered its long-term vision through development plans since independence, but it's not always been able to hit its targets due to lack of funding, corruption, and mismanagement of projects. The current version is a 15-year long-range development plan. This is divided into 3 5-year plans which started in 2015. This recently launched 3rd plan will end in 2025-2026. Under the leadership of late President John Magufuli, Tanzania achieved lower middle income status 5 years ahead of time. As the country starts its 3rd development plan, it faces multiple challenges, including COVID-19, tax evasion, corruption, and lack of innovation. The plan will also focus on strengthening industrial production capacity and the provision of services. Funding for the plan will come from diverse sources, including soft loans, donor funds, grants, and government coffers. The United Nations Development Project head says they will support Tanzania in its development journey.
We as UN agencies promise to work together with the government in implementing this 5-year development plan.
The government says the plan will ensure the active participation of the private sector in creating 8 million new jobs between July 2021 and June 2026. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Let's head out west now to the continent's largest oil producer. Nigeria's government is facing a perennial headache over what to do with petrol subsidies. The country's petrol subsidy spending is now ballooned. It's spending over $300 million a month just on petroleum subsidies. Now, the government says these subsidy payments are simply not sustainable, but it's still finding it very difficult to remove them. Why? Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with that story.
For every litre of petrol trucked out from a tank farm like this, the Nigerian government currently pays 23 US cents as subsidy so petrol could be sold at lower prices to consumers across the country. The Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation says 103 million litres of fuel are trucked out from tank farms mainly in Lagos for sale across the country, costing the government over $12 million monthly. And since Nigeria imports virtually all of its refined petrol, the cost could go up further with a continued rise in the price of crude.
And the government doesn't have the capacity to continue to sustain this. Already the NNPC has given indication that it may not be able to remit significantly to the Federation account. And this has a systemic impact, not just on the federal government, it has effects on the states, it has effects on the local governments.
Petrol currently sells for 39 US cents in Nigeria, but the government says it should actually be selling for 62 cents if the subsidy was not in place.
It is clearly impossible for government to continue to subsidize. The money is not there. You have to choose. It is very clear that today things are not as they were before. The earnings of government have reduced by 60%.
It's been close to 5 months now since the minister made those comments, but the subsidy is still very much in place and growing in size. In the face of threats by labor unions to embark on strike and possible mass protest, the government has been indecisive in removing the subsidy.
We need to bring a lot of creativity and innovation and sensitization into this so that you can have the buy-in of the people, have the buy-in of labor and all of that. Otherwise, I mean, this is like just kicking the can down the road. Eventually, the economy will have to pay dearly for this kind of wrong policy choices.
It's a paradox that Nigeria needs crude prices to continue to rise so it could earn more revenue. But higher crude prices also translate to higher petrol prices here. As costly as the subsidy is, it is quite popular with people across the country.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm not expecting government to remove the subsidy. Most especially not this critical time, because everybody is already passing through one hardship or the other.
The government has been locked in talks with labor unions in the country for about 3 months now over the removal of the subsidy, and up till this moment, no headway has been made. This is surely a tough nut for the government to crack. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
On to Tunisia now. The Telnet Group has signed an agreement with the French firm Hemeria to develop and launch over 24 satellites that will aid in Earth observation but also connectivity, especially with nanosatellites for both African and Arab states. Telnet has already successfully designed Tunisia's first satellite, which was launched into orbit March this year. CGTN's Alan Chouachi has this report from Tunis.
Tunisia's government has welcomed Telnet's technological and commercial cooperation project with French company Hemeria. Experts have said that investing in the Internet of Things is a step forward for Telnet Group, which raised Tunisia's global profile in March after it successfully blasted off Challenge 1 satellite in Kazakhstan.
The constellation of 26 to 30 nanosatellites will be developed in partnership with a French technology firm. This new system will use the Internet of Things technology. It will allow us to launch new services which are not possible with terrestrial networks.
The Minister of Information and Communication Technologies added that the state will provide all necessary support to guarantee the success of Telnet's operations and achieve its ambitious space program.
We encourage this project and all technological advances in Tunisia. The launch of the first Tunisian satellite was a historic moment. All Tunisians are proud of Telnet's achievements. The future of scientific research will be bright because conquering space has always been a dream for humanity. Telnet is giving us hope.
Telnet Group's founder and general manager says the technology company also plans to send the first Tunisian astronaut in space.
And now we are looking for the new steps, Challenge 2 with the constellation of African satellites, but also we are looking for a dream for many young Tunisian people, like an astronaut to be sent to the international station space, which will be the first Tunisian who can be sent to space.
Telnet Holding is the leading Tunisian engineering and technology consulting company with over 600 employees. It has several subsidiaries in France and around the world. The tech firm operates in many countries in North Africa and the Middle East region.
Tunisia launched its first domestically made satellite, Challenge 1, this year. That made the North African state the 6th African country to manufacture its own satellite and see it reach space. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
An ocean and thousands of kilometers separate China and Kenya, but for one young member of the Communist Party of China, the East African country is starting to feel like home. Ramah Nyang has lived in Kenya since September 2020. He's found inspiration and friendship by building ties and making a difference in Kenya.
Tafadhali utaweka malipo pale, alafu tukufungulie hizo stations za StarTimes. Kama ni kupitia kupigia simu.
Kenya for me is a very good place to work and even live. Just divided now. What I do is no matter just to earn money for myself, it's just to let more people in Africa can enjoy the digital life. Morning, Peter.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Yeah, show me that map.
Oh, yeah, today what appointment have you been?
Today we'll check the dealers in Narokatang.
No.
Yes. My name is Archie. This is my Chinese name called Yang Dongqi. And now I'm working in StarTimes Kenya. And my job is the sales manager.
In September 2020, Archie came to Kenya right after his graduation. Archie conducts field visits for sales and marketing.
So today is a very nice day, and we just come from Nairobi to Narok. And today our plan is just to check one village that have our village project. Hi, Faith.
Hi, too.
This is Archie from StarTimes. And today I just check your equipment. So how about your dish? Now it's still working?
Yeah, it's still working.
Ah, let me see what you are watching.
Faith Kinyayo and her family are one of the beneficiaries of the 10,000 Villages initiative. Spearheaded by Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2015,
中非人文合作计划，中方将为非洲援建5所文化中心，为非洲1万个村落实施收看卫星电视项目。
The initiative seeks to expand access to digital TV. 20 households were connected in every village, as well as 3 projectors for public spaces. 20 households were connected in every village, as well as 3 projectors for public spaces.
What Africa now have is actually what we have maybe 20 years ago. So we know what Africa wants. Just about the 10,000 Village project, we know they need the digital TV. The good content, they need to get news outside their country, their village.
As a young CPC member, Archie is guided by the values and the principles of the party as he seeks to make a difference in Kenya.
When I was young, I have a very good environment to grow up. But compared with here, the young people, especially in the rural area, they have their dreams, but they don't know how to achieve this. They don't have the ways to be successful.
moments like these, Archie has witnessed the impact Star Times is having on rural communities, and it fills him with pride.
Sometimes it's very difficult to help somebody, but our Star Times using the Village project provided the free digital TV to extend their horizon.
A business trip to Narok proved life-changing for Archie. It was in the middle of the Europa football tournament, and even though Star Times had installed the infrastructure for digital TV, the Children's Centre could not afford the subscription. Seeing the disappointment on the children's faces, Archie offered to pay the subscription himself.
I just see the smiles from that boys. They were very happy because you see the football is everything for them.
For Faith, Star Times has helped broaden her horizons and fuel her dreams.
Since I was young, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I have also watched programs of lawyers. They have motivated me and made me feel that I can also be a lawyer and be like them. The way they act, I also want to fight for people's rights.
The first one, conversion team, sales and payment.
Kenya is a long way from home for Archie, but this new job has come with new friends.
So sometimes I feel very lonely and helpless, but in just when I feel this kind of emotion, I can talk with my colleague, I can talk with my sales, with my assistants, with my regional manager. They are so friendly to me and show enough respect to me. Now I just feel I already fallen in love with Africa, not just because the environment, also the people here.
All right, then let's zoom out and take a much bigger picture of the wider African economic performance. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, has reversed economic gains up and down the continent by an enormous margin. The World Bank has forecast the lowest economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa. In its latest Global Economic Prospects report, the bank is forecasting that the global economy will expand by about 5.6% in 2021. But that will be driven mostly by a few large economies. Now, given very uneven access to vaccines, a slow pandemic recovery, low-income countries essentially will only have a 2.9% GDP growth rate in 2021. Output levels next year, in fact, are forecast to be at least 5% lower than pre-pandemic projections. In low-income countries, the pandemic has exacerbated underlying challenges to the extent that growth is actually expected to average just 2.5% between 2021 and 2022. That's roughly 0.7% below previous forecasts. All right, then, so let's explore this in a bit more detail. If you're a policymaker across Africa, how then do you chart the way forward? Let's explore that in a bit more detail with Professor Emmanuel Nadozie. He's the Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation. He joins us now live from Harare. Good evening to you, sir. So, is it a bit too early, though, to start talking about recovering from the pandemic, given the fact that in many economies we're struggling to just keep the pandemic under control?
Thank you for having me. Understandably, the number one issue at this point is to deal with the pandemic at hand. But by no means is it too early to begin to talk about the post-COVID-19 economic recovery and reconstruction. In Africa, they say you can sing and dance at the same time. So I don't see why that's not going to be possible. So that's something that one has to pay attention to at this point in time to ensure that economic recovery takes place, even though the resources are devoted to fighting the pandemic, to ensure that once the pandemic is over, such issues as debt management, economic recovery, job creation, and restarting growth will be something that has to take priority immediately.
All right, then. So let's focus on one specific thing. The pandemic, of course, has greatly disrupted the way we work, the way we learn. It's set back education attainment and access to likely hundreds of millions of children right across Africa as well. How do we solve that particular problem in a continent where access to grid power, access to the internet is nowhere near as widespread as it should be? Is it time for us to start thinking of the internet as a public utility to which we must all have unhindered access?
Well, you know, there's a saying that we must never waste a crisis. In other words, this major crisis that Africa and the rest of the world are facing at this point, the pandemic, has not only devastated lives and livelihoods and brought economic and suffering and economic recession everywhere, but it has also provided an opportunity to relook at the issues relating to education, which is critical for human capital development and for economic growth and transformation overall. What does that mean? It means that now the inadequacies of the existing educational systems have been laid bare, and people can see not just simply in terms of access, but also the inequalities that exist. Because as we speak, if you look at it globally, you'll see that more advanced countries quickly adapted by digitalization and access to technology that will improve educational, spread and for young people. But if you look at it at the developing countries, many of which are in Africa, you find that you have that kind of gap where school closure basically created a situation where over 90% of the students between April and March in 2020 were out of school. And that has set them back in some cases by 12 months, by 18 months. And this is significant. The only way to deal with this problem going forward is to pay attention to internet access and to technology overall, the distance learning and so on and so forth, even though that have the hybrid that could be utilized. So I agree with you 100%. Internet ought to be a public utility. It's no longer a luxury. It is a must and something that must be seen in that way.
Indeed, focusing on something else, though, this pandemic has exposed just how incredibly reliant we are as African economies on external supplies for everything from pharmaceutical supplies, PPEs, the medicines that we consume across the continent. But is this rush to build vaccine plants in several countries, is that sensible, given that A, the lead time to actually build these facilities tends to be at least 7, maybe 10 years in some cases, and 2, we have some production facilities on the continent already. Aspen Pharmacare in South Africa, the Pasteur Institute in Senegal, Tunisia and Egypt also have facilities of their own. Doesn't it make much more sense to concentrate on scaling up these facilities as a matter of priority?
Well, I don't think it's a question of either or. I think it's a question of doing the two things simultaneously because they all have a role to play. The danger you run in focusing only on the existing ones is that once this pandemic is over, people will forget that the medical systems and the healthcare system and medical supplies have to be sourced internally, and we have to develop the capacity to be able to manufacture and distribute these things in the continent, because there are other priorities that will take over. So this is an opportunity not to miss, to deal with the critical issues of the healthcare systems and healthcare delivery for Africans, and to put in place the environment, the conducive environment, as well as the incentives that will make these things possible. I agree. The lead time for developing these kinds of vaccine production or medical supplies production takes some time. But this is the right time to address this problem because it is fundamental, as the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated. And besides, if people are forecasting everywhere that in the future there will be future pandemics.
But at the end of the day, Professor Ndozie, the fact of the matter is that resources are limited. We have a limited amount of capital available, and whatever capital we can raise externally does tend to be relatively expensive. So if you have a limited pot of resources to work with, doesn't it make sense to bet on what you already have in hand?
Well, I beg to disagree with that. It's not necessarily the limitation of capital, unless you're talking about the resources available to governments to do these things. But governments alone cannot do it. They can provide the business-friendly environment and the policies as well as the incentives that will enable the private sector, both domestic and foreign. One thing that African countries mistakenly do is when they think about external capital, they always think about loans and they're going to the capital markets. But there is foreign investment, which I think is a major source of mobilizing external resources. And this is the one dimension that could be utilized. It's only being used in various other industrial areas. Why not in the medical supplies production and distribution?
I'm glad you brought up that point, because as far back as 2012, the continent had developed the pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa, and that was coming in the wake of the SARS outbreaks that we'd seen across the world, the H1N1 flu outbreaks that we'd seen. And at the time, the African Union said, yeah, we've got a problem here. Our foreign dependency is an issue. We need to develop local capacity. That was 2012. Now we're in the middle of a pandemic, and yet this plan really didn't seem to move anywhere. What went wrong?
Well, I don't know how to begin to respond to this question, quite frankly, because if you look at the history of the development trajectory of the continent, you will realize that there was the Lagos Plan of Action, there was a Abuja Treaty, there was NEPAD, there was African Peer Review Mechanism, there was even the poverty reduction strategy, although it was not purely African, and so on and so forth. And within those, you have the Program for Infrastructure Development, PIDA, you have AIDA, which is Accelerated Industrial Development for Africa, and then you have the Pharmaceutical Master Plan for Africa as well. Now, these are fantastic plans. If you look at them very well, they are well constructed, they are well intentioned, and they are well structured. But the issue is in the implementation. And this is the reason why you highlighted the issue of 2012, and up to now, nothing, really much has not really happened. For us, this is why, ACBF, our primary goal, or one of them, is implementation capacity, because we realize that Africa has a lot of good ideas and good strategies and good plans, but the capacity to implement that, and that's not just simply in terms of skills and financial resources or infrastructure for that matter, but it is also the what we call the not so obvious capacity, such as political will and leadership. Because there's a saying, where there's political leadership, there's a way. That means that if the right environment tone is set at the top, and the right environment is put in place, and right incentives are put in place, and visionary leadership that holds people accountable, we are ready to make sure that these things get implemented.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Professor Emmanuel Ndozi, Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation. Good to have you on the program. Thank you very much for your insights this evening, sir. Now, on to Africa's youngest country, South Sudan. The Chinese government has started talks with officials there to try and promote the growth of SMEs and trade in that particular nation. South Sudan's economy is struggling to recover from years of conflict. Reduced oil production, which the country heavily relies on to finance nearly 100% of its expenditure, and the COVID-19 pandemic have only made matters a lot worse. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with this report.
China is urging South Sudan's government to prioritize developing the economy as relative peace returns to the country. Beijing says small and medium enterprises would provide employment and promote people's well-being in South Sudan. It is promising to establish an exchange platform between China and South Sudan's business community.
South Sudan's economy is heavily dependent on oil, but the fluctuation in international oil prices has brought uncertainty to the economy. Development of small and medium enterprises is essential to South Sudan's economy. China is ready to import goods from South Sudan.
South Sudan's government says trade between the East African country and China is growing. The country's Ministry of Trade says it encourages South Sudanese businesses to trade with China.
I would like again to express my heartfelt and kind appreciation to all of you, the Chinese government and people, for the continuous support and coordination you accorded to South Sudan to support its economic and trade development in various ways, such as attending short courses or seminars, workshops, exhibitions, scholarship.
South Sudan's government says it wants to have frequent meetings with Chinese officials and business people. This week's meeting was attended via video link by senior Chinese officials in the Ministry of Commerce and those from Yiwu City. South Sudan's government relies on oil money to finance 98% of its spending, but oil prices currently remain unstable. In addition, the effects of COVID-19 and devastating floods have worsened the economic situation in the country. The government says it hopes more South Sudanese people will now venture into businesses. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. The World Food Programme is warning of a looming global hunger crisis. And Hong Kong has launched its strategy to drive the full adoption of digital tech. The details coming up next.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the programme. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Burkina Faso, the country's president, Ramah Nyang, has taken over as defence minister from Sherif C. This follows demands from the opposition for the resignation of the prime minister and the minister of defence, given insecurity in the country. The opposition scheduled 2 days of protests on the 3rd and the 4th of July in response to in which they were to pay tribute to victims of terrorism. Burkina Faso has been experiencing a range of civilian attacks by Al-Qaeda and Islamic State-affiliated groups. At least 10 people have been killed in an overnight attack in the eastern end of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Local authorities say that armed attackers raided the Bo district and set several houses on fire. This attack comes after the eastern city of Beni was hit by 3 bomb blasts over the weekend. And finally, Saudi Arabia and Russia have tentatively agreed to increase OPEC plus oil output in the months to come. Delegates have confirmed that negotiations over the details of that supply increase are in progress. The proposal under discussion is expected to add about 2 million barrels a day of output to the planned output between August and December. That's a run through your news headlines. Now then, the head of the United Nations World Food Programme has issued a dire warning. David Beasley says that dozens of countries could be headed towards famine of biblical proportions, destabilizing and mass migration as the global hunger crisis is worsened by this pandemic. The ominous remarks come as G20 foreign ministers meeting in southern Italy pledged to step up the fight against food insecurity. But so far, they've offered very scant details on how they will keep millions of people around the world from starvation. Tony Waterman has more from Matera.
For hundreds of millions of people around the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has been less a fight for safety and more a fight for survival. Months of lockdown have left many out of work. Already meager wages replaced by nothing at all.
I can stay hungry, but my children cannot. I feel helpless. I break into tears. We don't get any help from anybody.
Grounded flights and closed borders have hampered humanitarian efforts. According to the World Bank, the pandemic has pushed nearly 100 million more people into poverty, an unprecedented increase. Close to 1 billion worldwide are now suffering from hunger and malnutrition. The problem is particularly acute in conflict zones, where humanitarian access is often intentionally disrupted. In the north of Ethiopia and the Tigray region, the UN says 1 million people are on the brink of famine. International aid agencies say they must be given access before a humanitarian catastrophe unfolds.
41 million people are knocking on famine's door as we speak. If we don't address their needs, over the next 6 to 9 months, you could have unprecedented famine of biblical proportions, destabilization of nations, and mass migration.
WFP chief David Beasley made an emotional plea for more financial support, saying billions are needed to bring food security to the world's most desperate communities.
G20 ministers who have been meeting in southern Italy have vowed to redouble efforts to fight growing global hunger, especially in Africa, with promises of increased investment. But they offered few specifics on how exactly they plan to pull tens of millions of people back from the brink of starvation.
Clearly, one of the first steps to build a better world is to make sure everyone is fed. We have all reaffirmed our common commitment against food insecurity.
The group is targeting zero hunger by 2030, an already lofty ambition now immeasurably complicated by an evolving and lingering pandemic. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Matera, Italy.
Hong Kong has launched its Fintech 2025 strategy. The idea is to drive the full adoption of digital tech in the Special Administrative Region's financial services sector by 2025. There are 5 key goals in total, and that includes getting all banks to provide digital services 100%. Here's Ann Cheng with that report.
The Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the city's de facto central bank, has announced Fintech 2025. It's a set of 5 goals that aim to encourage Hong Kong's financial sector to adopt technology comprehensively by 2025, so fair and efficient financial services can benefit the city. Like other banks, DBS supports the strategy, especially the first goal for all banks to fully adopt fintech and completely digitalize operations from front end to back end. DBS says it's been doubling down on its digital capabilities and surging digital adoption under the new normal of the pandemic. It has launched an app for customers, which also offers account opening for SMEs in 3 days. And it has an AI software for remote ID verification.
The AI is our home-built software module, and we are going to support the mainland Chinese ID in end of this year. And in order to reduce from 3 days and even further. So we have been working with some company search firms. We are actually working with them to migrate their interconnectivity from a host-to-host, we call FTP, to API real-time capability as well.
Meanwhile, smart investment platform Acumen says it stands to gain from all banks going fintech. It has already launched Hong Kong's first retail bank-based robo-advisory with CMB Wing Lung Bank for customers to have automated solutions for their investments. Acumen says other banks are lining up to adopt this service too.
With the majority of fintech solutions here in the market, the number one hurdle is adoption, both by financial institutions and also by consumers. Adoption actually requires more players in unison to push out the message. And I think right now there aren't enough players in the market to really drive, I would say, large-scale adoption. So I think particularly with a lot of fintech players, both from regional fintech players coming to Hong Kong and also banks actually further adopting these types of services with their end clients, this will further drive up fintech usage.
Other goals from Fintech 2025 include future-proofing Hong Kong for central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, creating the next generation data infrastructure, expanding the fintech-savvy workforce, and nurturing the ecosystem with funding and policies. Under the strategy of enhancing financial data infrastructure, authorities will build a commercial data interchange, which one expert says will prove useful for SMEs.
The commercial data interchange platform can really facilitate the bank and non-bank to share information so that the bank can really assess the credit of the potential SME customers. By having that platform, actually it can help the bank to really lower the risk of granting the credit, helping the SME customers to really get a better financing. And also for other potential data providers, they can create some business case to unleash the value of their data. So actually it's a win-win-win kind of initiative.
He also says CBDCs can help facilitate cross-border fund transfers with lower costs and efficiency and enhance financial integration between Hong Kong and the Chinese mainland. Ann Chang, CGTN, Hong Kong.
Thailand's popular resort island of Phuket has reopened to international tourists, but only if you're fully vaccinated. No quarantine will be needed for the island's first visitors in 15 months, and that's part of a test case referred to by the government as the Phuket Sandbox. It's designed to see if tourists can return safely without quarantine. Our correspondent, Martin Lowe, has the latest.
Fire trucks provided an arc of foam to welcome the first flight at Phuket Airport. Then the first international tourists appeared. They will be confined, not in a hotel room, but by the sea. They can go anywhere on the island. This is a big step forward for tourism, not only here in Thailand, but across the whole world.
A real privilege and really happy.
I feel to cry, really, because really emotional.
Taking the sights, mate. Enjoy Thailand, right?
Yeah.
Visit my girlfriend.
Those arriving face restrictions. They must be fully vaccinated, from approved countries, take multiple COVID tests and stay at designated hotels. But this group is the first of what Thailand hopes will be many in the coming months. Here at the Phuket Sandbox Command Centre, visitors will be monitored electronically by signals emitted from tracking apps on their phones. If infection breaks out, they can be quickly traced. Tourists will appear on the map as a yellow dot. After 2 weeks, the dot will turn green. From that point, they can travel anywhere within Thailand.
I think the whole world watching us. We're scared, we're reluctant, we hesitate. But we need to go ahead and do the best. I think restrictions, to me, is a bit too rigid. But with due understanding, the logic behind that restrictions.
The experiment is desperately needed. 80% of Phuket's income comes from foreign tourists, and in their absence, the economy has collapsed. Locals line up for food handouts. The worst hit are said to have been forced to eat insects and wild snakes.
We've lost money by staying open, but people come here and take photos showing Phuket as a ghost town. So I've stayed open, and I've asked my friends to do the same to make the island look alive. I've heard many people want to come. I believe it will be better in the end.
There are a number of hoops that tourists have to jump through to get here, but it's described as being like a gate. Do you open it a little and let people through a few at a time, or do you open it wide and find yourself overrun and then have to slam it shut again? The hope is to keep the sandbox open as long as it's needed, and a trickle of tourists will become a flood. Resorts around the world are watching to see if this is a way to reignite global tourism. Martin Lowe, CGTN, Phuket.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices. As we discussed a little earlier in the hour, Saudi Arabia and Russia basically trying to agree on how to raise output. 400,000 barrels a day is the hike that's been agreed to. At least that was on the agenda for today's OPEC Plus meeting, even though that's lower than what some may have expected. But given the sort of demand destruction we're seeing because of the surge in new COVID-19 cases, particularly those driven by the Delta variant around the world, you can understand why the production group is being relatively cautious in how much oil it's pumping into the market. Here's what's coming up next. We'll introduce you to a Zimbabwean entrepreneur who's making waves in the wine business despite a lack of prior experience. Welcome back. One last story for you in the hour. This one coming from Zimbabwe. A former waiter turned sommelier is making waves after getting into the wine business despite having no prior practice or experience in that sector. CGTN's Ramah Nyang tells us the story of this 36-year-old entrepreneur and how he turned his misfortune into a profitable enterprise.
When Zimbabwean Tinashe Nyambudoka left his homeland to work as a waiter in a restaurant in neighboring South Africa, he had never tasted wine. Now he's among Zimbabwe's renowned sommeliers. In 2017, Nyambudoka started his own wine brand, Kumusha, which means home or origin in Shona.
It took a while to get traction, but once people really got into wine, man, it's been doing phenomenally well. I have to be humble and honest and grateful about it. I'm exporting wines into America, into Zimbabwe, into Kenya, into Holland, and soon into the UK and Nigeria, and everywhere it's landing, people love it and it's selling out. So I have to say I'm really grateful that I'm making delicious wines that people are enjoying.
It's crazy. The 36-year-old recently starred in a new documentary dubbed Blind Ambition. The film focuses on the journey of Zimbabwe's first sommeliers to take part in the blind wine tasting championships in France in 2017 and 2018. The film, which had its world premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York 3 weeks ago, clinched the Audience Award for Best Documentary.
Us making our own team and us knowing each other and be able to train and taste together, drink lots of wine we're not really exposed to, especially the international wines, and traveling the world. It was my first time into Europe, and I've only read about this wine region in books, and to be in Champagne, to be in Burgundy, to be in the Moselle, to be, it was just so fulfilling, and having to compete there with the best tasters of the world.
Having come from a background with no history and culture of wine, these differences from predominant sommeliers set them apart.
These guys are out to disrupt in a major way the prevailing wisdom, which is that wine drinkers are predominantly white and people with wine knowledge are predominantly white. That fascinated us, and we really wanted to see what happened and wanted to follow these guys as they challenged that white wine world.
U.S. founding father Ben Franklin was once quoted saying, "Wine makes daily life easy, less hurried, with fewer tensions and more tolerance." For Nyambudoka, he hopes to turn more countrymen to the practice. Ramah Nyang, CGTN.
2021 vintage.
Quick update on the currencies. The CFA franc has weakened quite sharply in the month of June. It's actually slipped by 3% last month. The low of the year, 559.887. Today's close was 552. So that gives you a sense of how close it is to that particular level. The Cedi, though, the Ghanaian Cedi, that's given up all the gains against the American dollar so far. In fact, it's fallen to 589 against the greenback. That's the weakest we've seen it in years. In the last 5 years, in fact, the Cedi's lost roughly 50% of its value against the American dollar. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program. In the course of the hour, there are many ways to get your feedback back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.